A single father was kicked out of a restaurant with his son until a mysterious woman paid the bill. What happened next changed their lives forever. A love story that was born at the most unexpected moment. Get ready to be moved. Subscribe to the channel, give it a thumbs up and comment on where you are watching from. Sweat trickled down David Miller's forehead as he adjusted his tie for the 10th time that muggy March afternoon. The thermometer read 93 degrees in Brooklyn, and the air conditioning at Bella Notte couldn't alleviate the heat rising from the melting asphalt of Azpilicueta Street. His brown eyes nervously scanned the elegant environment, observing the tables covered with immaculate white linen, the uniformed waitstaff circulating with steaming plates, and the discreet buzz of well-dressed patrons. "Dad, can I order dessert?" asked Max, his 8-year-old son covered in tomato sauce up to his ears. The boy had devoured half of his plate of gnocchi with a hunger that broke his father's heart. It was almost 2 in the afternoon, and this was the first decent meal they had shared together in 3 days. "Of course, my champ," David replied, forcing a smile, as his hands trembled imperceptibly. In the pocket of his well-worn dress pants, his fingers clutched the credit card as if it were a good luck charm. It was the last one that still worked, or at least that was what he hoped. The restaurant buzzed with the typical late lunch crowd in New York City. Executives discussed business amid laughter, young couples shared expensive risottos, and a group of elegant ladies chatted about their latest trips to Europe. David felt like an imposter in this environment. His white dress shirt, once his favorite for important meetings, now hung loosely on his shoulders, a result of the pounds lost in the past few months of anxiety and scarce meals. "Sir," approached the waiter with a heavy Italian accent, "which dessert would you like for the child?" Max looked at his father with anticipation, his green eyes shining like stars. David quickly glanced at the menu, pretending to choose between the options while mentally calculating if he could afford it. Cheesecake, $7. Creme brulee, $6. Artisanal ice cream, $5. "The cheesecake, please," he decided, thinking that if it was the last time he could bring that joy to his son, at least, it should be special. While they waited for dessert, David watched Max color drawings on a napkin with a crayon borrowed from the house. The boy drew a house with 3 figures at the door: Dad, Mom, and him. Even after 2 years, he still included his mother in his drawings. David swallowed the lump that formed in his throat every time he saw these innocent expressions of his son's longing. "The drawing is beautiful, Max," he murmured, ruffling the boy's brown hair. "Tell me what everything is." "This is our new house," Max explained, pointing with his sauce-stained finger. "When you get a good job, we'll live there, and Mom will come back from Spain to live with us again, right, Dad?" David's heart shattered a little more. How could he explain to an 8-year-old that his mother wouldn't be coming back? How could he say that maybe there wouldn't even be a new house? That the severance pay had run out 2 months ago, and that job interviews felt like an endless nightmare of "we'll review your profile" and "we'll be in touch." The cheesecake arrived on fine china, decorated with cocoa powder and a small mint leaf. Max clapped his hands, his eyes lighting up in a way that made everything worthwhile. David watched every bite, etching into memory his son's genuine smile, the little sounds of satisfaction he made, the way he closed his eyes to savor it better. "Is it good?" he asked, already knowing the answer from the spectacle of happiness before him. "It's the best dessert in the whole world," declared Max solemnly, as if making an official proclamation. "Thank you, Dad. You're the best dad in the universe." His son's words were like daggers of love and guilt. David had to blink several times to hold back the tears that threatened to form. When the waiter brought the bill, his hands trembled as he took the card. $25. A sum that 6 months ago would have been insignificant for a civil engineer with 15 years of experience. Today, it represented almost half of the money he had borrowed from the neighbor. "Here you go, sir," said the waiter, presenting the card machine. David inserted the card with deliberately slow movements, as if he could delay the inevitable. The machine emitted a prolonged beep. "Card declined." The words appeared on the blue screen like a death sentence. "It must be a problem with the machine," David murmured, his face beginning to burn. "Can you try again?" The waiter, visibly impatient, swiped the card again. Same result. A third attempt produced the same cruel beep. Max stopped eating, sensing the tension spreading across the table like an oil stain. "Dad, what's happening?" The manager, a short, stocky man with a thick moustache reminiscent of an old movie actor, approached the table with firm steps and a stern expression. His voice, which had once sounded welcoming when they were seated, now carried a chilling coldness. "Sir, is there a problem with the payment?" No, it must be some bank error," David stammered, his voice sounding strange to his own ears. "Can I try another card?" But there was no other card. The only one left had been blocked for a week. His hands desperately rummaged through his pockets, searching for money he knew didn't exist. A few coins, 2 crumpled $5 bills, $23.70, not even a quarter of the bill. Silence spread across the nearby tables like concentric waves. Conversations were interrupted, forks suspended in the air, curious and judgmental glances turning toward their table. David felt the weight of each. David felt a weight like molten lead in his veins. "Dad?" Max's voice sounded small and frightened. "Sir?" The manager's voice rose an octave. "Are you able to make the payment or not?" The humiliation burned like acid. David looked at his son, who had completely stopped eating and was staring at him with wide eyes full of confusion and fear. This was it. This was how it would all end. Expelled from a restaurant like criminals in front of an 8-year-old who just wanted to eat cheesecake with his dad. I can... David started, but the words got stuck in his throat. There was nothing to say. There was no money. There was no card that worked. There was no way out. It was then that she appeared. An elegant woman, around 40 years old, stood up from a table in the corner of the restaurant. She wore a pristine navy blazer that beautifully contrasted with her light brown skin, and her black hair fell in soft waves to her shoulders. Her steps toward their table were firm and decisive, as if she knew exactly what to do. "Excuse me," she said to the manager, her voice calm but carrying a natural authority. Without saying a word to David, she extended a platinum card to the waiter. "Please put this table's bill on my card." The platinum card slid through the machine with a soft beep of approval, breaking the awkward silence that had settled in the restaurant. David remained frozen, watching the mysterious woman who had just saved them from a devastating public humiliation. She had an elegant and confident posture, the kind of presence that commanded respect without needing to raise her voice. "This isn't necessary," David murmured, trying to regain his composure while feeling the gaze of all the customers still fixed on their table. "I can't accept." The woman turned to him, and it was then that their eyes met for the first time. She had honey-colored eyes, intense and penetrating, that seemed to see beyond appearances. For a moment that felt eternal, the world around them disappeared. The noise of the restaurant, the curious glances, even Max's presence. "Everyone deserves a second chance," she whispered, leaning slightly toward David. Her voice was low, almost intimate, filled with an understanding he couldn't decipher. The subtle scent of jasmine reached him, mingling with the aroma of coffee and cinnamon that lingered in the air of the restaurant. Max looked back and forth between them, his childlike eyes trying to process what had just happened. The boy had completely stopped eating his cheesecake, the spoon suspended in the air as he watched the stranger who had appeared like a guardian angel. "Miss," Max said with the brutal honesty typical of children, "you're very pretty." Thank you for helping my dad." A genuine smile lit up the woman's face, transforming her serious expression into something warm and maternal. She knelt beside Max's chair, coming down to his eye level. "You're welcome, dear, and thank you for the compliment," she replied, her voice gaining a sweetness that contrasted with the firmness she had shown moments before. "What's your name?" "Max. And this is my dad, David. He's an engineer, but he's out of work now because the company went bankrupt," the boy explained with the disarming sincerity that only children possess. David briefly closed his eyes, feeling a new wave of shame wash over him. It was as if his entire life was exposed in a few innocent phrases. From an 8-year-old, when he opened his eyes again, he found the woman's understanding gaze. "Civil engineer?" she asked, genuinely interested. "Yes," David replied, his voice still hoarse with emotion. "Specializing in historic structures and renovations." Something sparkled in her eyes, professional interest perhaps, but she made no further comments on the subject. The restaurant manager, visibly uncomfortable with the entire situation, approached again, now with a completely different attitude. "Ma'am, thank you very much for your generosity," he said, bowing exaggeratedly. "It's always a pleasure to have such a distinguished customer in our establishment. May I offer you a complimentary dessert?" "That won't be necessary," she replied coldly, clearly bothered by the sudden change in treatment. "I just want you to treat all customers with the same respect, regardless of their circumstances." The veiled reprimand made the manager visibly blush. He murmured some apologies and quickly walked away, probably to instruct his staff on how to better handle delicate situations. David abruptly stood up, his movements awkward from the mix of gratitude and embarrassment he felt. He was nearly 10 centimeters taller than her, but somehow he felt diminished in her imposing presence. "I need to know your name," he said, his voice laden with desperate determination. "I need to know how I can repay this. I can't just accept charity." "It's not charity," she gently but firmly interrupted. "It's solidarity. We all go through tough times." "But I insist," David began. "And I insist that you focus first on taking care of your son," she cut in, looking at Max, who had returned to eating his cheesecake, seemingly less affected by the adult tension around them. "Some things are more important than pride." The phrase hit David like a punch in the stomach, not for its cruelty, she had spoken kindly, but for the raw truth contained in those words. Was his pride really hindering his ability to care for his son? "At least tell me your name," he pleaded. The woman hesitated for a moment, her fingers nervously toying with the strap of an Italian leather bag that probably cost more than David's monthly rent. "Anna," she finally said, but something in her voice suggested that it might not be the whole truth. "Anna," David repeated, committing the name to memory. "Anna, I promise I will find a way to repay this, no matter how long it takes." She studied him. For a moment, her expression unreadable. A long moment passed, as if she were assessing his sincerity. There was something in her gaze that David couldn't interpret. Melancholy, loneliness, recognition. "You don't owe me anything," she finally said. "But if you really want to do something, be a good father. That's what matters." Max, who had finished his dessert, wiped his mouth with the napkin and stood up. Without warning, he walked over to the woman and hugged her, his little arms wrapping around her waist. "Thank you, Aunt Anna. You saved my dad." The emotion that crossed her face was intense and fleeting, as if that childlike embrace had touched something deep and painful. She briefly returned the hug, her eyes closing for a moment. "You're welcome, dear," she murmured, her voice slightly choked. When Max pulled away, she straightened up quickly, regaining her mask of control and elegance, but David had noticed the emotion, and it only fueled his curiosity about who this mysterious woman really was. "I have to go," she said abruptly, checking a pricey watch on her wrist. "I have a meeting in 15 minutes. She walked quickly toward the exit, her heels clicking. On the marble floor of the restaurant, David followed her with his eyes, desperate to memorize every detail. The way she walked, the exact color of her hair, the navy blazer that fit her silhouette perfectly. At the door, she turned one last time. Her eyes met David's across the crowded room, and for a moment he could have sworn he saw vulnerability in her gaze. Then she disappeared into the crowd on Augusta Street, leaving only the scent of jasmine and a million unanswered questions. David stood still for several seconds, trying to process what had just happened. Max tugged at his shirt, bringing him back to reality. "Dad, is Aunt Anna our friend now?" "I don't know, Max," David replied honestly, his eyes still fixed on the door through which she had exited. "I really don't know." But one thing he knew for sure, he was going to find her again, even if he had to turn New York upside down. The following 2 weeks turned into a meticulous obsession for David. Every morning, after dropping Max off at the local elementary school, he roamed the streets of Brooklyn with the determination of a private investigator. He always carried a brown envelope containing $127.50 in carefully counted and recounted bills, money he had earned by selling his old scientific calculator and some technical engineering books. The neighborhood, which he had only known superficially, revealed itself to be a labyrinth of possibilities. David memorized every cafe, every restaurant, every art gallery in the area. He always started on Aspicuelta Street, passed by Wizard, climbed Harmonia, and ended on Fradique Coutinho, creating a systematic route that he religiously repeated every day. "Have you seen a woman, around 40 years old, with black hair, very elegant?" he asked waiters, magazine, vendors and boutique owners. Most looked at him with suspicion. A man in increasingly worn clothes asking about an unknown woman didn't inspire much confidence. At the Center Cafe, a small and cozy spot frequented by artists and intellectuals, the waitress, with purple hair and multiple piercings, looked at him with compassion when he described Anna for the 10th time. "Look, buddy, there are so many beautiful women who come here," she said, drying glasses behind the counter. "You don't have a picture of her, do you? Or at least know her last name?" David shook his head, frustrated. How could he explain that he had shared such an intense moment with someone whose first name he only knew? How could he describe the feeling of mutual recognition that had passed between them in the restaurant? In the second week of searching, his determination began to waver. Max noticed the change in his father's behavior, the way he scoured the streets with anxious eyes, the distraction during the simple meals he prepared at home. "Dad, are you looking for Aunt Anna?" the boy asked on a rainy Thursday as they walked back from school. The yellowing leaves of the plane trees formed a slippery carpet on the sidewalks, and the air carried the characteristic smell of wet earth mixed with urban pollution. "Why do you ask that, champ?" "Because you keep looking at all the women on the street," Max observed, with the uncanny insight of children. "And you're always fiddling with that envelope in your pocket." David sighed, realizing he couldn't hide anything from his son. Honesty had always been the foundation of his relationship with Max, even when the truths were hard to explain. "It's just that I need to return the money she gave us," he explained. "It's important to do the right thing, you understand. When someone helps us, we have to find a way to give back." Max nodded solemnly, as if processing an important moral lesson. But then his eyes lit up with an idea. "What if we look at the Grand Central Market? Grandma always said everyone in New York goes to the Grand Central Market at least once a month." The boy's innocent suggestion made sense to David. The Grand Central Market was indeed a convergence point in the city, frequented by people from all walks of life. Maybe Anna was one of those New Yorkers who appreciated the authenticity of fresh produce and the century-old tradition of the place. The following Saturday, David and Max got off the subway at the Grand Central Station and walked through the historic downtown streets toward the impressive building of the Grand Central Market. The 1933 construction, with its Gothic towers and colorful stained glass, always impressed David with its architectural mastery. Even in his difficult circumstances, he couldn't help but admire the structural details of the building. The interior of the market buzzed with activity even on a Saturday morning. The intense aroma of spices, tropical fruits, cured cheeses and fresh fish created a unique olfactory symphony. Merchants shouted offers in English, Arabic and Italian, creating a joyful cacophony that echoed as they walked through the tall aisles of the building. "Wow, Dad, look at the size of that cod," exclaimed Max, pointing to one of the traditional stalls where enormous salted fish hung like trophies. They strolled slowly through the corridors, David splitting his attention between supervising his son, who wanted to touch everything, and scanning each female face in the crowd. It was an almost impossible task. Hundreds of people circulated through the market, creating a constant flow of movement and noise. It was in the tropical fruit section, among the colorful stalls of mangoes, cashews and cherries, that David saw her. Anna was standing in front of a stall of red fruits, carefully examining a handful of cherries as if she were a botany expert. She wore a simple white blouse and jeans, a striking contrast to the formal elegance she displayed at the restaurant. But her posture remained unmistakably proud. David's heart raced violently. For 2 weeks, he had imagined this moment, mentally rehearsing what he would say, how he would introduce himself. Now, faced with reality, all the carefully prepared words evaporated from his mind. "It's her," whispered Max, recognizing her immediately. "It's Aunt Anna." "Stay by my side," instructed David, nervously adjusting his shirt. He took a deep breath, feeling the envelope in his pocket as if it weighed a ton, and walked toward her. "Anna," he called, his voice coming out louder than he intended. She turned slowly, and for a fraction of a second, David saw genuine surprise in her eyes. But then a mask of professional politeness descended over her features, as if she were an actress slipping into a role. "I'm sorry, but I think you have me confused with someone else," she said, her voice cold and distant. She continued examining the cherries as if the conversation had already ended. "No, I'm not confused," David insisted, stepping closer. "You paid our bill at Bellanotte 2 weeks ago. Remember, Max?" He gestured to his son, who waved shyly. "I really don't know what you're talking about," she replied, but David noticed a tension in her shoulders that hadn't been there before. "Now, if you'll excuse me—" "Please," David interrupted, his voice carrying a desperation he couldn't hide. "I just want to return the money. It's not much, but it's the right thing to do." He pulled the envelope from his pocket, his hands trembling slightly. The stubbornness that characterized him, the same that often got him into trouble, now manifested as pure determination. "I don't accept charity," she declared, extending the envelope toward her. "My grandmother taught me that debts should always be paid, no matter how long it takes." Anna looked at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. Her eyes moved between David's determined face and Max's hopeful expression, who watched the interaction with childlike fascination. "You don't understand," she murmured, her voice losing some of its calculated coldness. "It wasn't about money." "Then what was it about?" David asked, genuinely confused. The question hung in the air between them, heavy with meanings neither was ready to explore. Around them, the life of the market continued, vendors haggling prices, children running between stalls, the eternal urban ballet of buyers and sellers. But for David, Max, and the mysterious woman who insisted she wasn't Anna, the world had shrunk to that small space between. the colorful piles of tropical fruits. Anna remained silent for long seconds, her fingers unconsciously gripping the bag of cherries as she watched the envelope David held out between them. The noise of the market seemed to fade around the small, tense circle they had formed among the fruit stands. "Aunt Anna, don't you remember us?" asked Max, stepping forward with the unwavering confidence of children. "You smell just like the flowers you did at the restaurant." The boy's innocent observation made Anna briefly close her eyes, as if a painful memory had been awakened. When she opened them again, the mask of indifference had cracked slightly, revealing a vulnerability she struggled to hide. She began, but was interrupted by the shrill voice of the vendor at the stall. "Hey, miss, are you going to take those cherries or not? There are customers waiting," shouted the woman in a dirty apron, gesturing impatiently with her dirt-covered hands. The interruption broke the moment of tension. Anna quickly turned to the seller, pulling a $50 bill from her wallet with abrupt movements. "I'll take them all," she said, pointing to the entire tray of cherries. "All?" The vendor's eyes widened. "But there are more than 2 pounds here. Are you making jam?" "Something like that," murmured Anna, avoiding the gaze of David and Max. As the woman weighed the fruit and prepared the bags, David took the opportunity to position himself so that Anna couldn't easily escape. His determination had turned into something almost desperate. This could be his only chance to resolve the situation that had been tormenting him for weeks. "You can pretend you don't know me," he said quietly, "but I know you remember. And I know you understand why I need to do this." Anna took the bags of fruit, her movements now visibly agitated. "You don't understand anything about me," she replied, but her voice trembled almost imperceptibly. "Then explain it to me," David insisted. "Tell me why a stranger would pay the bill for 2 people she has never seen in her life. Tell me why you looked at me that way at the restaurant." The direct question made Anna stop moving. She stood still for a moment, holding the bags of cherries as if they were anchors preventing her from floating away. Around them, the market continued its frantic dance. A man haggling over the price of a bunch of bananas, an elderly lady carefully selecting ripe tomatoes, children running between the legs of adults. "Because," she began, then stopped, clearly struggling with herself. "Because everyone deserves dignity. No one. You should go through what you all went through." "What we went through?" echoed David. "You speak as if you know exactly what it is." The comment hit Anna like a slap. Her face visibly paled, and she took a step back, bumping into a pile of coconuts that rolled noisily across the floor. "I don't know anything," she said quickly, but the lie was too obvious to convince anyone. Max, who had been quietly observing the adult conversation, suddenly pointed at Anna with his finger. "Dad, she's lying. The teacher taught us that when people lie, their faces turn red and they talk really fast." The child's observation, made with the brutal honesty characteristic of children, made Anna laugh, a bitter, humorless sound that resembled a sigh. "Your son is very smart," she commented, addressing David for the first time since the conversation began. "He takes after his mother," David replied automatically, then immediately regretted the comment. Mentioning his ex-wife always brought a cloud of sadness to conversations involving Max. "Where is she?" Anna asked, her genuine curiosity finally overcoming her artificial resistance. "Spain," Max said before David could respond. "She went to look for a better life and promised she would come back for us, but it's been 2 years. The silence that followed was heavy with mutual understanding. Anna looked at David with an expression that mixed compassion and something else, recognition perhaps, as if she too knew the pain of abandonment, the weight of broken promises. "I have to go," she said abruptly, turning toward the exit. But David wouldn't give up so easily. He followed her, Max running alongside to keep up with his father's long strides. The chase through the market caught the attention of several merchants, who watched curiously as the determined man followed the elegant woman trying to escape. "Anna, wait!" David shouted, his voice echoing through the high aisles of the building. "At least accept the money." She stopped again, this time near the main entrance where the stained glass windows cast patterns of light on her face. When she turned to face him, there were tears held back in her eyes. "Do you want to know the truth?" she asked, her voice low but intense. "The truth is that I saw you in that restaurant. I saw the shame on your face, the way you tried to protect your son from humiliation, and I saw myself there too." The confession came out like a dam breaking, words that had apparently been held back for a long time. "I know what it's like to be ashamed of not being able to pay a bill," she continued, her hands trembling as she held the bags of fruit. "I know what it's like to try to maintain dignity when everything is crumbling around you. And I know how painful it is when people look at you as if you were a beggar." The revelation left David momentarily speechless. The elegant woman, who in the restaurant seemed to have stepped out of a fashion magazine, knew financial humiliation. "So you understand," he said softly, "why I need to return this money. It's not about the amount. It's about maintaining the dignity that you helped me preserve." Anna studied him for a long moment, as if assessing the sincerity in his words. Finally, she extended her hand. "My name is not just Anna," she said, her voice firmer now. "It's Anna Beatrice Smith Johnson, and you're right. Everyone deserves to maintain their dignity." David smiled for the first time in weeks, a genuine smile that lit up his tired face. He placed the envelope in her hand, feeling as if a huge weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "Thank you, Anna Beatrice," he said, "for everything." She tucked the envelope into her bag, but her eyes remained fixed on his face. "You can just call me Anna." "And David?" "Yes? Is your resume still updated?" The question caught him completely off guard. "Yes, why?" Anna hesitated for a moment, then seemed to make a decision. "Because maybe I know someone who needs a civil engineer specializing in historic preservation." Anna's proposal echoed in David's mind throughout Saturday afternoon. After she disappeared again into the crowds of the historic center, leaving only a discreet business card and the promise to get in touch on Monday, he and Max walked through the streets of the historic center as if they were floating. "Dad, is Aunt Anna going to get you a job?" Max asked, as they admired the old facades of the buildings on November 15th Street. The boy had a habit of asking direct questions that went straight to the heart of David's concerns. "I don't know, champ. She said she knows someone who might need an engineer," David replied, twirling the business card between his fingers. The paper was high quality, with embossed gold lettering, "Anna Beatrice Johnson, Associate Architect, Smith & Johnson Architectural Projects." The company name sounded familiar, but David couldn't recall where he had heard it. In the world of civil construction in New York, there were hundreds of architecture firms, from small family studios to large international corporations. On Sunday, while Max watched cartoons on the small TV in the rented apartment they shared in Chinatown, David obsessively researched the company Smith & Johnson online. What he found intrigued him even more. Smith & Johnson was not just another architecture firm. It was one of the leading companies specializing in historic preservation in New York. Their projects included the renovation of the City Theater, the restoration of 19th-century mansions in the Light District, and the revitalization of abandoned industrial buildings transformed into cultural centers. "My God," David murmured, reading the list of projects on the screen of the neighbor's borrowed computer. Each of those jobs represented exactly the kind of technical challenge he loved the most. Engineering, the delicate combination of preserving the past and adapting for the future. The company's website featured a professional photo of Anna, showing a serious woman with her hair styled in an elegant bun, wearing a pristine grey suit. It was a more formal version of the person he had met at the market, but something in her eyes remained the same, an intensity that suggested a genuine passion for her work. On Monday morning, the phone rang at exactly 9 o'clock. David had dropped Max off at school and was trying to organize the papers scattered across the kitchen table, resumes printed on cheap paper, yellowed letters of recommendation, certificates from specialized courses. "Hello, David. This is Anna Smith." Her voice sounded different over the phone, more professional, but also more nervous than during their casual meeting at the market. "Anna, good morning. Thank you for calling," David replied, trying to sound confident despite the nervousness he felt. "Look, I spoke with my partner about your specialization, and we actually have a project that could benefit from your experience. Could you come to the office this afternoon to discuss?" The address she provided was on 5th Avenue, near the subway station 42nd Street, in an upscale area of the city that David knew more by reference than by frequent visits. He arrived 15 minutes early, wearing his only suit still in decent condition, a navy blue piece he had bought for his wedding years ago, now hanging a bit loosely on his slimmer shoulders. The building housing Johnson & Smith was a perfect example of 1940s architecture, with preserved Art Deco lines and a facade blending tradition and modernity. The old elevator, with a grating door and a uniformed operator, ascended slowly to the 10th floor. The company's reception impressed David with its understated elegance. White walls displayed black and white photographs of completed projects, while Brazilian-designed furniture created a cozy yet sophisticated atmosphere. The receptionist, a young woman with curly hair and a warm smile, directed him to a conference room with a panoramic view of the city. "He's here," announced Anna, entering the room 5 minutes later. She wore a simple yet elegant black dress, and her hair fell loosely over her shoulders, a more relaxed appearance than in the professional photo, but still professional. Accompanying her was a man in his 50s, with neatly cut grey hair and intelligent eyes behind modern glasses. He introduced himself as Edward Johnson, the founding partner of the firm, and as David quickly discovered, Anna's father. "David, Anna told me about your specialization in historic preservation," said Edward, shaking the candidate's hand firmly. "We are starting a complex project in Chinatown, the restoration of a 1920s mansion that will be transformed into a cultural center. We need someone with experience in old structures." During the next hour, David found himself in one of the most stimulating professional conversations he had had in years. Edward and Anna bombarded him with technical questions about consolidating old foundations, preserving ornamental elements, and reconciling modern systems with historic structures. "The most delicate issue," Anna explained, showing detailed architectural plans, "is that the mansion has a mixed structure, solid brick masonry on the ground floor and hardwood on the second floor. We need to install a modern elevator without compromising the structural integrity." David studied the drawings with growing enthusiasm. It was exactly the kind of challenge that made his engineer's heart race. A technical puzzle requiring creativity, historical knowledge, and mathematical precision. "The solution would be an independent structure for the elevator," he suggested, quickly doing mental calculations. "Micro piles to avoid interfering with the existing foundations, and a self-supporting metal tower that—" He abruptly stopped speaking, realizing he had gotten too carried away. During months of unemployment, he had grown accustomed to formal interviews where his technical suggestions were met with polite professionalism, but little enthusiasm. "Go on," encouraged Edward, genuinely interested. "That would only rest on specific points of the existing structure after localized reinforcement with metal profiles," David concluded, his confidence gradually returning. Anna and Edward exchanged a glance that David couldn't fully interpret, but it seemed to carry approval. "David," Edward finally said, "I would like to make you an offer. How about starting as a temporary consultant on this project? 6 months initially, with the possibility of extension as the work progresses." David's heart raced. 6 months of stable work on a project that truly interested him, with professionals who seemed to value his experience. "I accept," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady, despite the emotion. "Great," Anna smiled. "Can you start tomorrow? I would like to visit the construction site and meet the team." Leaving the office an hour later, with a signed contract in his pocket and the first paycheck deposited in his account, David walked through the bustling streets of the central region feeling lighter than he had in months. The April sun was softer, the streets seemed less hostile, and even the chaotic traffic of New York sounded like a symphony of possibilities. But while waiting for the subway at the 42nd Street station, a persistent doubt grew in his mind. Was it a coincidence that Anna had exactly the perfect position for his qualifications? Or was there something more behind that opportunity that arose so conveniently after their casual encounters? The answer, he suspected, would reveal much more about Anna Beatrice Smith than her impeccable professional resume suggested. The 1920s mansion in the heart of Chinatown stood majestically among modern buildings, like a stubborn survivor from a more elegant era. David arrived at the construction site the next morning, carrying a worn leather briefcase and a white hard hat he hadn't worn in 6 months. The familiar smell of cement, wood, and metal welcomed him like a warm embrace. "Impressive, isn't it?" Anna's voice came from behind him as David admired the ornate facade of the building. She was wearing jeans, safety boots, and a shirt. The light blue outfit was a more casual look that perfectly matched the work environment. "It's magnificent," agreed David, his engineer's eyes already identifying structural challenges. "Just look at these stucco moldings, and the original windows are still intact." They walked together toward the main entrance, where some workers were already cleaning up the debris accumulated from decades of neglect. Anna greeted each one by name, demonstrating a genuine familiarity with the team that impressed David. "Everyone, this is David, our new consulting engineer," she introduced. "David, these are the Silver brothers. John, Peter, and Charles. They've been working with me for over 5 years. John Silver, the oldest of the three, a strong man in his 40s with calloused hands and an easy smile, shook David's hand firmly. "Nice to meet you, engineer. Anna mentioned you're an expert in these old buildings. We really need it because this one has its surprises." "What kind of surprises?" David asked, genuinely curious. "Come see," said Peter Silver, the middle brother, leading them inside the building. What David found inside the mansion was both fascinating and concerning. The basic structure was surprisingly well preserved, but decades of makeshift modifications had created a maze of technical problems. Walls had been removed without considering their structural function. Makeshift electrical installations ran exposed through the ceilings, and leaks had damaged some wooden beams on the second floor. "Jesus," David murmured, examining a beam that showed clear signs of termite infestation. "This is going to require a lot more detailed work than I imagined." Anna watched him as he moved through the spaces, taking notes in a notebook and measuring distances with a tape measure. There was something about his concentration, the way his fingers touched the walls as if they could feel the history contained in the cement and wood, that fascinated her. "What's your initial assessment?" she asked when they finished inspecting the ground floor. "Complex, but not impossible," David replied, closing the notebook. "We'll need a complete structural survey before any intervention, and some of these beams will need to be replaced or reinforced." They climbed the wooden staircase to the second floor, the steps creaking under. Under their feet, The sound echoed through the empty building, blending with the noise from the street outside, the heavy traffic of Chinatown, street vendors announcing their goods, the constant buzz of one of the busiest areas in the city. "Anna!" David suddenly said, stopping in the middle of the second-floor hallway. "Can I ask you a personal question?" She hesitated for a moment, her hands nervously adjusting the strap of the tool bag she was carrying. "Sure. Why did you offer me this job?" The direct question made Anna look away, pretending to examine a colorful stained glass window. At the end of the hallway, the morning light filtered through the painted glass, creating multicolored patterns on the wooden floor. "Because you have the necessary qualifications," she replied, but her voice sounded rehearsed. "Anna," David turned to face her, "we both know there are hundreds of engineers specializing in historic preservation in New York, many with more experience than I have, many who haven't been unemployed for 6 months. The silence that followed was broken only by the distant noise of the workers' hammers on the ground floor. Anna walked to the window overlooking the street, watching the constant flow of pedestrians and cars. "Do you want to know the truth?" she finally asked without turning around. "I always prefer the truth." Anna took a deep breath before speaking, as if preparing to reveal something she had been holding back for a long time. "My father built this company from the ground up," she began, her voice low but clear. "He started as a small architecture firm in the 1980s, doing residential projects for the middle class. I grew up watching him work 16 hours a day, sacrificing weekends, missing birthdays and graduations." David remained silent, sensing that she needed to tell this story at her own pace. "When I graduated in architecture, he made me a partner in the company, not out of nepotism, but because I proved I deserved it. I worked on construction sites, learned every aspect of the business, earned the respect of the team." She turned to face David, and he could see the vulnerability in her eyes that she rarely allowed others to see. "But the construction world is very male-dominated, David. Clients who ask to speak to the responsible architect when I introduce myself. Suppliers who direct all technical questions to my father, even when I'm the one leading the meeting. Engineers who question every one of my decisions as if I were an intern." The frustration in her voice was palpable, built up over years of professional battles to prove her competence. "In the restaurant, when I saw you protecting your son, trying to maintain dignity in an impossible situation." She paused, searching for the right words. "I recognized something. The same determination I feel every day to prove I deserve to be where I am." David began to understand. "You saw a fighter." "Exactly, and fighters recognize other fighters." Anna smiled for the first time since she began telling her story. "Besides, I researched your work. The projects you developed at your former company were brilliant. Your former boss was a jerk who couldn't recognize talent when it was right in front of him." The revelation that she had looked into his professional background should have unsettled him, but David felt strangely flattered. It meant her interest in him went beyond casual sympathy. "So it wasn't charity," he concluded. "Definitely not charity, it was an investment." Anna's eyes sparkled with something that could be amusement or challenge. "The question is, are you going to prove to me that I made the right choice?" David smiled, feeling a spark of healthy competitiveness ignite in his chest for the first time in months. "You can bet I will." The moment was interrupted by John Silver's voice shouting from the ground floor, "Anna, David, you guys need to see this." They quickly descended the stairs, finding John and his brothers gathered around a wall they had started to demolish. Peter was holding a sledgehammer, and Charles was pointing at something inside the open wall. "What happened?" Anna asked, approaching them. "We were removing this partition wall that the project marked as non-structural," John explained. But when we opened it, we found this. Inside the cavity of the wall, perfectly preserved by decades of insulation, were old documents rolled in parchment paper. David crouched down to examine the findings more closely, feeling an emotion he hadn't experienced in a long time: the thrill of discovery. "These are the original blueprints of the construction," he murmured, carefully unrolling one of the documents. "Dated 1922, and look here, there are handwritten notes from the original architect." Anna knelt beside him, their faces almost touching as they examined the old drawings. For a moment, the outside world faded away. There were no workers, no deadlines, no complications, just two professionals passionate about what they did, sharing the magic of a historical discovery. It was then that David realized he was starting to feel much more for Anna than just professional admiration. The days of May passed in a succession of chilly mornings and sunny afternoons typical of New York autumn. David had settled into a routine that made him feel useful again. He dropped Max off at school at 7 in the morning, arrived at the construction site at 8, and worked until 5 in the afternoon before picking up his son and preparing dinner in their small apartment in Chinatown. The mansion revealed new secrets every week. Besides the original blueprints, the team had discovered authentic Portuguese tiles hidden behind makeshift partitions, a small safe embedded in the wall of what was likely an office, and a service staircase that had been bricked up decades ago. "It's like the house is telling its own story," commented Max one Thursday afternoon when David took him to see the site where he worked. The boy was fascinated by the restoration, asking technical questions that even surprised Anna. Like any 8-year-old, Max had no social filters, and his direct comments often broke the professional tension that still existed between David and Anna. "Aunt Anna, why don't you have kids?" Max suddenly asked as they examined the recently uncovered tiles in what would be the future exhibition room. The question caught Anna completely off guard. She was kneeling on the floor, carefully measuring each tile for cataloguing, when she froze with the measuring tape in hand. "Max," David quickly reprimanded, "that's not a polite question." "It's okay," Anna said, but her voice sounded slightly tense. "It's a valid question." She stood up, dusting off her knees. "I've always been very focused on work, Max. Sometimes we make choices, and some things get put on hold." "My mom also made choices," Max observed with the disconcerting wisdom of children. "She chose to leave, but Dad chose to stay with me." The comment created an uncomfortable silence. David felt the familiar tightening in his chest that always accompanied mentions of his ex-wife. Anna watched the interaction between father and son with a thoughtful expression that he couldn't fully decipher. "Your Dad made the right choice," she finally said, her voice laden with an emotion that seemed genuine. The following week, the company received an unexpected visit. David was on the second floor, supervising the installation of a temporary scaffolding system, when he heard raised voices coming from the ground floor. One of them was clearly Anna's, but it sounded more tense than he had ever heard. Quickly descending the stairs, David found Anna facing a well-dressed man in his 50s, with impeccably styled grey hair and a posture that radiated business authority. The stranger held an expensive leather briefcase and gestured animatedly as he spoke. "It's not a question of personal competence, Anna Beatrice. It's a question of scale. This project needs a company with more resources, more experience in public contracts." "Martin," Anna's voice was controlled, but David could sense the underlying tension. "We won this bid because we presented the best technical proposal. The project is on schedule and within budget." "For now," retorted the man named Martin. "But you know how these historic preservation projects go. Complications, extra costs, delays always arise. My company has the experience to handle these issues." David immediately recognized the type. A predatory executive trying to intimidate smaller competitors to steal lucrative contracts. He had worked with several of them throughout his career. "Can I help with something?" David interrupted, stepping closer to the group. Martin quickly assessed him with a look that clearly categorized him as irrelevant, just another subordinate employee. "And you are?" "David Miller, consulting engineer responsible for the structural part of the project," David replied, extending his hand cordially but firmly. "Ah, yes, I've heard of you." Martin's tone was condescending. "Former employee of Stone Construction, right? What a shame what happened to that company." The mention of his former company made David tense involuntarily. Martin had done his research and knew exactly where to strike. "It happened to be poorly managed," David replied calmly. "Fortunately, I now work with professionals who value technical quality over corporate politics." The comment made Anna smile discreetly, but Martin did not seem intimidated. Technical quality is important, of course, but experience in large projects counts too. "Have you managed any construction with a budget over 10 million? We manage projects based on competence, not on the size of the check," Anna retorted, her patience clearly wearing thin. "Look, Anna Beatrice, I'll be direct." Martin opened his briefcase and pulled out some documents. "I have a partnership proposal here. My company takes on the main management of the project, and you remain as specialized sub-consultants. Everyone wins." "And what would our participation be in this partnership?" Anna asked, but her tone suggested she already knew. David Miller didn't like the response. 15% of the total value, plus a bonus for efficiency if we meet the deadlines." The number was insulting. David saw Anna clench her fists, the knuckles turning white with pressure. "Martin," she said, her voice dangerously low, "are you suggesting that I hand over a contract that my company legitimately won for 15% of its value?" "I'm suggesting that you be pragmatic. The market is tough, especially for smaller companies. This is an opportunity for you to learn from more experienced professionals." The condescension in his voice was unbearable. David stepped forward, positioning himself slightly between Martin and Anna. "Martin, was it? Let me clarify something." David's voice was calm, but carried a firmness that made the other man stop gesturing. "I've worked in this field for 15 years. I've seen many experienced companies like yours turn simple projects into costly disasters because they think size substitutes for competence. And I've seen small, agile companies like this one deliver superior results because they care about every detail of the work," David continued. "So your generous offer to let us work for you for 15% of what is already ours. I'll suggest you take it somewhere the sun doesn't shine." The silence that followed was broken by the sound of hammers coming from upstairs, where the Smith brothers continued working, oblivious to the corporate drama unfolding below. Martin shoved the documents into his folder with abrupt movements, his face red with barely contained anger. "You will regret this decision," he said, directing his words mostly at Anna. "This market is smaller than you think, and it has a long memory." "Is that a threat?" David asked, taking another step toward Martin. "It's a friendly warning," Martin replied, but he was already retreating toward the exit. "Good luck with the project. You're going to need it." After he left, Anna remained still for several seconds, staring at the door through which the unwanted visitor had disappeared. Her hands still trembled slightly with adrenaline from the confrontation. "You didn't have to do that," she finally said, not looking at David. "Do what?" "Defend me. I could handle him on my own." David studied her profile, observing the tension in her shoulders, the way she avoided his gaze. "I know you could," he replied softly, "but that doesn't mean you should have to deal with it alone." Finally, Anna turned to face him, and David saw something new in her eyes, a vulnerability she rarely allowed others to perceive. "Thank you," she said simply. You're welcome. We're partners, remember? Partners protect each other. The word partners hung in the air between, in them, laden with meanings neither was ready to fully explore. But David sensed that something had shifted in that moment. The dynamic between them had moved from purely professional to something more personal, more intimate. And for the first time since the restaurant, he allowed himself to imagine that perhaps Anna felt the same. The summer festival organized by Smith & Johnson was Eduardo Johnson's idea, who insisted that the team deserved a gathering to celebrate the exceptional progress of the mansion project. Anna initially resisted the idea, arguing that it was an unnecessary expense, but her father was adamant. "Anna, you work too hard," Eduardo said one Friday afternoon, watching his daughter review plans for the third time that day. "And so does the team. Everyone needs to relax a bit." The festival was organized at the construction site itself, transforming the mansion's courtyard into an urban version of a country fair. Colorful bunting was hung between the historic windows, an improvised bonfire was lit in a metal barrel in the center of the courtyard, and long tables were set up with traditional dishes prepared by John Smith's wife. David arrived at 7 in the evening, accompanied by Max, who was excited about the prospect of a real party at the place where his father worked. The boy wore a borrowed plaid shirt and a straw hat that Anna had specially bought for him. "Wow!" exclaimed Max, his eyes shining at the sight of the decorations. "It's like school parties, but way better." The entire team was present. The Smith brothers with their families, office staff, some partner suppliers, and even a few curious neighbors who had been invited to see the restoration project. Anna emerged from the makeshift kitchen carrying a pot of steaming spiced cider, wearing a simple, floral dress that made her look years younger. Her hair was loose, with a few strands escaping from a side braid, and she smiled in a relaxed way that David had never seen before. "You look different," David commented as she approached to serve him. "Different how?" Anna asked, filling his mug with the warm liquid that smelled of cinnamon and ginger. "More light, unarmed." Anna laughed, a genuine sound that mingled with the country music playing from a speaker connected to Peter Smith's phone. "It must be the spiced cider, or maybe it's because, for one night, I don't have to prove anything to anyone." They sat at one of the long tables, Max between them, enthusiastically attacking a plate of sweet corn pudding. The conversation flowed naturally. Anna shared funny stories from the company's early projects. David shared some of the most unusual discoveries he had made in old buildings, and Max contributed insightful observations that often surprised the adults. "Aunt Anna," Max suddenly said, pointing at the bonfire, "why do people jump over the fire?" "It's tradition, dear. They say it brings luck and grants wishes," Anna explained, her eyes shining with the light of the flames. "Really? Can I jump?" "That bonfire is too high for you," David interjected quickly, "but maybe Aunt Anna can explain other traditions." "Actually," Anna stood up, extending her hand to Max, "there's a safer version for kids. Come, I'll teach you." She led Max to a small candle had been lit in a tin can, creating a perfectly safe bonfire for a child to jump over. Max was delighted with the game, jumping repeatedly while making secret wishes. Watching Anna interact with her son, David felt something stir in his chest, a tenderness that went beyond the physical, attraction that had been growing over the past few months. She was natural with children, patient and genuinely interested in what Max had to say. "Your son is special," commented Edward, sitting next to David as they watched Anna and Max play. "He means everything to me," David replied simply. "Anna has always wanted to have children," Edward said suddenly, his voice low so only David could hear. "But she never found the right man, or maybe she never gave the right man a chance to appear." The comment made David look at Anna's father with curiosity. There was something in the way Edward spoke that suggested more than a casual observation. "She is an exceptional woman," David said carefully. "And you are a good man," Edward retorted. "My daughter needs someone who values her for who she is, not for what she can offer professionally." The conversation was interrupted by an explosion of laughter coming from the direction where Anna and Max were. The boy had stumbled, trying to make a more elaborate jump over the candle, and Anna had caught him, both falling to the ground in a pile of laughter. "Daddy, Aunt Anna is so funny," shouted Max, running back to the table. As the night went on, and the spiced cider took effect, the atmosphere became more relaxed. Someone suggested a square dance, and even Anna was convinced to join in. David watched her dance with John Smith, her movements awkward yet filled with genuine joy. It was when she returned to the table, her cheeks rosy from the exercise and the warm drink, that David made an impulsive decision. "Want to take a walk with me?" he asked, gesturing toward the silent mansion. Anna hesitated for a moment, looking at Max, who was engrossed in an animated conversation with the Smith children about video games. "Just for a few minutes," she agreed. They walked through the interior of the partially restored mansion, their footsteps echoing in the empty hallways. The light from the bonfire in the courtyard filtered through the windows, creating dancing shadows on the walls. "It's strange to see this place so full of life," Anna commented, stopping at the window that overlooked the courtyard where the party continued. "For decades, it was empty, forgotten. Now it has purpose again," David said, positioning himself beside her. "Like all of us, I suppose." She turned to look at him, and David realized how close they were. He could smell the jasmine perfume she always wore, mixed with the cinnamon aroma of the spiced cider on her lips. "David," she began, but the word died when their eyes met. There was something in the air between them, a tension that had been building for months, fueled by professional conversations that extended beyond the necessary, glances that lingered a few seconds longer, moments of physical closeness that neither of them made an effort to avoid. "Anna," David murmured, his hand instinctively rising to touch her face. The moment was broken by Max's voice shouting from the courtyard, "Daddy! Aunt Anna! Where are you?" They quickly stepped away, the spell broken by the reality of parental responsibility. But when they returned to the party, something had changed irreversibly between them. The rest of the night passed in a succession of carefully casual conversations and furtive glances. David helped clean up after the guests left. Anna insisted on accompanying him and Max to the bus stop, and when they finally said goodbye, there was a hesitant moment where neither of them knew exactly what the appropriate protocol was. "Thank you for the party," David said. "Max loved it. Thank you for coming. You both made it more special." They looked at each other for a long moment, aware that they were on the brink of something that would change everything between them. But with Max watching, tired yet still awake, neither dared to take the next step. It was only on the bus, watching Max fall asleep against his shoulder, that David realized he had completely fallen in love with Clara Santos. And for the first time in 2 years, he began to imagine what it would be like to share his life with someone again. The question was whether Anna felt the same, and if she would be willing to risk the professional stability they had built together for a chance at love. The call came on a rainy Monday in June, when David was reviewing the structural calculations for the mezzanine that would be installed in the mansion. The phone rang insistently until he finally answered, irritated by the interruption. "Hello? David? It's me." The voice on the other end of the line made David's blood run cold. It was a voice he hadn't heard in 2 years, but still recognized instantly. Soft, melodic, with a slightly accented Spanish that hadn't been there before her departure. "Clara?" he asked, his own voice sounding strange to his ears. "Hi, love. How are you?" The endearment hit him like a punch to the stomach. Clara, his ex-wife, Max's mother, the woman who had left for Spain in search of a better life and promised to return in 6 months. 2 years later, there was her voice, casual and familiar, as if they had spoken the previous week. "What do you want, Clara?" David asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "What coldness, David? Can't I call to see how my husband is?" "Ex-husband," he corrected automatically, "and you can. But usually people give a heads up before resurrecting from the dead." An awkward silence followed, interrupted only by the sound of rain hitting the windows of the mansion. David looked around the workspace that had become his refuge, wondering how he would explain that call to Anna when she arrived. "David, I know you're angry with me, and you have every right to be." "I have the right, but I need to see you. I need to explain some things." "Explain? Clara, you abandoned your 6-year-old son and your husband to chase after a guy you met on Facebook. What exactly needs to be explained?" The direct accusation made Clara sigh deeply on the other end of the line. "It wasn't like that, David. You don't understand what I was going through. The postpartum depression I never treated properly. The feeling of being trapped in a life I didn't choose." "A life you didn't choose?" David's voice rose an octave. "Clara, we planned our family. You wanted to have kids as much as I did." I thought I did. But when Max was born, everything changed. I felt lost. And when Frank showed up, offering me a chance to start over—" Frank. The name left David's mouth like something bitter. "And where is Frank now?" Another revealing silence. "It's over," Clara finally admitted. "For 6 months, but that doesn't matter now, David. What matters is that I'm back. I'm in New York, and I want to see my son." David's world seemed to tilt on its axis. For 2 years, he had created a new reality where it was just him and Max against the world. He had explained to his son that his mum was in Spain building a better life, that maybe one day she would come back, but that they were fine on their own. He had learned to braid hair, to cook beyond instant noodles, to be both father and mother simultaneously. "Where are you?" he asked, his voice coming out hoarse. "In a hotel near downtown. David, can we meet? I brought gifts for Max, and I missed you both so much." "You missed us." The anger David had held on to for 2 years finally exploded. "Clara, you sent exactly 4 emails in 2 years. 4. Max asked about you every night for months. He made drawings to show you when you came back. He kept the teddy bear you gave him like it was a sacred relic. I know I was awful, but I was confused, David. I didn't know how to be a mom, how to be a wife. I needed time to figure out who I was." "And did you figure it out?" "I figured out that I made the biggest mistake of my life." The confession made David sit heavily in a plastic chair someone had left on the construction site. He looked around the mansion he was restoring, thinking of Anna, the new life he had started to build, the fragile balance he had managed to create for himself and Max. "Max is at school," he finally said. "He gets out at 5. Can I pick him up?" "No." The answer came out louder than David intended. "I'm sorry, but no. You can't just show up in an 8-year-old's life after 2 years as if nothing happened. I need to talk to him first, prepare him." "Okay," Clara agreed, her voice sounding hurt. Can you take him to see me tonight? I'm at the Central Hotel downtown." "Maybe. It depends on how he reacts to the news that his mom is back from voluntary exile." "David, please. I know I messed up, but he's my son too." The phrase echoed in the silence that followed. Technically, Clara was right. She was still Max's legal mother, even though she had morally abdicated the role years ago. David couldn't completely prevent contact even if he wanted to. "I'll talk to him," David finally said. "And if he wants to see you, I'll take him to you. But Clara, if you hurt that boy again, if you create expectations you can't meet, I swear I'll do whatever it takes to make sure you never get close to him again." I understand. And David, I know you met someone. The statement caught David completely off guard. How do you know that? Social media. There are pictures of you at a summer festival with a beautiful woman and Max. You all look happy. David felt a mix of invasion of privacy and instinctive protection regarding Anna. How had Clara found those photos, and what else did she know about his current life? That's none of your business, he said coldly. You're right. I just want you to know that I'm not here to destroy your happiness. I'm here for the right reasons this time. After he hung up the phone, David remained seated in the silent mansion for several minutes, trying to process what had just happened. In 15 minutes of conversation, his carefully reconstructed life had been turned upside down. Anna arrived half an hour later, finding him still sitting in the same position, staring at the phone. Did something happen? She asked, immediately sensing that something was wrong. David looked up at her, the woman he had fallen in love with, the professional partner who had become so much more than that, the person who had brought joy back into his life and into Max's heart. Max's mom is back, he said simply, and he watched Anna's face pale as the meaning of those words settled between them. The conversation with Max was one of the hardest things David had ever had to do as a father. They were sitting in the small living room of the apartment, dinner cooling on the kitchen table as David tried to find the right words to explain that his mom had returned after 2 years of absence. "Mommy's back?" Max asked, his green eyes wide with surprise. "Really? Forever?" "She came back from Spain, yes," David confirmed, choosing his words carefully. "But I don't know how long she will stay. She wants to see you, talk to you." Max was silent for several minutes, processing the information with the seriousness that only children can show in situations that fundamentally alter their world. "Is she going to live here with us again?" he finally asked. "No, champ. She's staying in a hotel. And, well, many things have changed in these 2 years." "Because of Aunt Anna?" The direct question made David swallow hard. Max had noticed the shift in the dynamic between him and Anna, the lingering glances, the conversations that stretched beyond necessity, the way Anna had become a natural part of their daily lives. "Not just because of Anna," David replied honestly. "But she is part of our lives now, right?" Max nodded solemnly. "I like Aunt Anna. She is nice to me and makes you smile again." The simple observation hit David in the heart. His 8-year-old son had noticed that he had started to smile genuinely again, something that hadn't happened since before Clara left. "Do you want to see your mum?" David asked. Max thought for a long moment before answering. "Can I ask her why she left?" "Of course you can. You can ask anything you want." The meeting was set for 7 in the evening in the lobby of the Central Hotel. David arrived with Max, who was wearing his favorite shirt, one with a dinosaur design that Anna had given him a few weeks earlier. The boy was visibly nervous, gripping his father's hand tighter than usual. Clara was sitting in a leather armchair in the elegant lobby, wearing a beige blazer and a skirt that clearly hadn't been bought in the US. Her hair was longer, cut in sophisticated layers, and she wore subtle makeup that made her look older, more polished. When she saw them, she quickly stood up, her eyes immediately filling with tears. "Max," she murmured, opening her arms. "My love, how you've grown." Max hesitated for a moment, looking at his father for encouragement, before slowly walking toward his mother. The embrace between them was cautious on both sides, Max clearly confused about how to behave, Clara emotionally overwhelmed. "Hi, Mom," Max said politely, but without the enthusiasm David would expect from a child reuniting with their mother after 2 years. "You're so big, so handsome," Clara said, her hands trembling as she touched her son's face. "You look like a little man." They sat in a reserved area of the lobby, Clara between David and Max. She had brought a bag full of gifts. Expensive toys probably bought at the airport, Spanish sweets, and a book about medieval castles. "I brought some things from Spain for you," she said, watching Max examine the gifts with polished but unenthusiastic interest. "Thank you," Max replied. Then, with the typical frankness of children, he asked, "Why did you leave without me?" The question made Clara briefly close her eyes. When she opened them, there were contained tears she struggled to control. "Mom was very sad, Max. Sometimes adults get so sad that they can't take care of the people they love properly. So I went to Spain to try to feel less sad." "And did you?" Max asked. "For a while I thought I did. But then I found out I was even sadder because I was away from you." Max processed the answer for a few seconds. "Dad was sad too when you left. But he didn't leave me alone." The innocent but devastating observation made Clara cover her face with her hands. David saw that she was genuinely emotional, but a cynical part of him wondered if the tears were from real regret or self-pity. "You're right," Clara finally said. "Your dad is much braver than I am. He stayed to take care of you when I couldn't." During the next hour, they talked about superficial things, Max's school, his friends, his hobbies. Clara seemed genuinely interested, asking questions and listening to the answers attentively. But David noticed that Max was keeping emotionally distant, responding politely but without the spontaneous openness he showed with Anna. "Max," Clara said when it was time to say goodbye, "Mom would like to spend more time with you in the coming days. We can do things together, go to the park, to the mall." Max looked at David before responding. "Can I bring Aunt Anna too?" The question caught Clara completely off guard. She looked at David with an expression that mixed surprise and something that could be jealousy. "Who is Aunt Anna?" she asked, although it was obvious she already knew the answer. "She's Dad's girlfriend," Max replied with the devastating simplicity of children. "She's an architect and works with him, and she makes the best pasta in the world." David felt his face burn. He and Anna had never officially defined their relationship, especially in front of Max. But apparently, to the mind of an 8-year-old, the situation was clear. "Max!" David began, but Clara interrupted him. "Of course she can come." "She," said, her voice carefully controlled, "I would really like to meet Aunt Anna." After they dropped Max off at home and he fell asleep, David called Anna. The conversation was tense and loaded with unspoken words. "How did it go?" Anna asked. "Complicated. Max was a bit distant with her, which is understandable. But Anna, there's something I need to tell you." "What?" "Max told Clara that you're my girlfriend." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. "And what did you say?" Anna finally asked. "I didn't correct him," David admitted. Because I don't know if I wanted to correct it." "David, Anna, I know our situation is complicated. I know we work together and that it might not be professional. But what I feel for you is real, and apparently it's obvious enough for an 8-year-old to notice." "Clara wants to meet me," Anna said, changing the subject. "How do you know?" "Because if I were in her place, I would also want to meet the woman who is raising my son." The word raising hung between them, loaded with implications neither was completely ready to explore. "Do you want to meet she?" David asked. "Honestly, no. But if it's important to Max, then yes." And that's how David found himself planning a meeting between his ex-wife, who had left the family 2 years earlier, and the woman he was falling for, who had helped him rebuild his life. What could possibly go wrong?